Good evening, members and officers of the Council and members of the public, which are none. Welcome to the meeting of the Standards Committee. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs, either through the security door to the left of the chairman or opposite the lifts in the foyer. Please do not use the lifts. Good evening, members and officers of the... There's an echo. Oh, Assembly Hall is square on the green, and officers will assist you and advise when it's deemed safe to return to the chamber. Does anyone intend filming the meeting? No, that's good. Please note the meeting is being live streamed for members of the public, except for any item of business where exempt or confidential information is considered following the exclusion of the press and the public. This meeting is also being recorded and will be broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel. Mobile phones. With everybody present, please ensure their mobile phones are turned to silent and they are not used to make or receive calls in the chamber whilst the meeting is in progress. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. We have an apology from Councillor Austin. Councillor Munns, good evening, will substitute for Councillor Austin, and Councillor Scobie will be substitute for Councillor Crittenden. Councillor Dabrow. Oh, you're here. Sorry. Item agenda 2, minutes of the previous meeting. I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of November 2023 be approved and signed as a correct record. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Bayford. Unless anyone has any objections to the minutes, I will take them as agreed. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Good. Item agenda 4, contract procedure rules. I welcome Matt Sanham to the meeting and he will present the report.
Thank you, Chair. The new Procurement Act 2023 is anticipated to come into force in October 2024. This will require a number of changes to be incorporated into CSOs to reflect the requirements that are captured under the new Act going forward and those requirements that will still sit under Public Contract Regulations 2015. A full rewrite of CSOs will be required in the future due to the number of changes potentially being made. At this time, full guidance on the implementation is limited and therefore we have instead opted for a refresh rather than a full rewrite. This refresh has been undertaken to ensure that following a recent review of the procurement process and with further amendments to CSOs anticipated in October, that these remain fit for purpose during the interim period. This is in the main due to changes to current levels of projected spend across the organisation on what are seen to be key regeneration and housing projects over the medium term. These changes will create capacity to focus attention on these projects. Whilst there are a number of subtle amendments, the main changes of significance are formally implement changes to the spend thresholds, increase to the values of the thresholds for below threshold contracts, and an update to organisational changes in job titles. The supporting documents referred to within the links to the CSOs will be refreshed once these have been approved, with particular emphasis on the purchasing guide. This purchasing guide provides practical guidance on how the CSOs apply to purchasing decisions and processes. It explains some of the more technical and legal issues involved in procurement and provides practical working examples. Members will have an opportunity to see the newly developed purchasing guide once this has been updated and presented to a future meeting of Constitutional Review Working Party as appended to the reworked 2023 compliant CSOs. You will also note that having been through the Constitutional Review Working Party, that they supported the revision to the CSOs and referred it here for endorsement and recommendation to full council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Has anybody got a Councillor Crittenden? I knew this was coming.
You knew it, you knew. Actually, it's not what you're expecting. Bottom of page 12 and top of page 13, what happened to the options? 5.1 and 5.2. That's my first question, and then I have a second one. I think it's proofreading.
Am I right in thinking that's what we voted on at the CWRP?
Well, you're going to recommend them on to FUGU?
I haven't got that on my...
my copy has, we're recommending them to FUGU, and 5.2 is CRWP, not Standards Committee, on my copy. So I was looking at that and I was a bit like, what? I think it's right if you translate.
Yes.
Yeah. But I just wanted to
It should
point
be
out
full
the.
council.
Yeah. And the second point is I just want to make this for the record what was discussed at CRWP, which is that we don't, as councillors, have access to the intranet. So whilst the document looks very good and quite happy to agree with it, we are unable to look at the supporting documentation that is linked into it. I didn't see that in the CRWP minutes. I think I've seen the CRWP minutes. I didn't see that as having come up, but I just want it noted again, that's all. Thank you.
Any other comments? No? A proposal and seconder to recommend to full council that the Standards Committee are asked to support revised content of the contract standing orders and recommend changes contained to the full council. Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Duckworth, seconder. Councillor Bayford. Thank you. Item agenda.
Is that agreed?
Is all agreed? Item agenda 5, could I ask for Ingrid to comment on the documents, please? Thank you.
On the member officer protocol, yeah? Yeah, thank you, Chair. And before I start, just thank you to Councillors Austin and Councillor Crittenden for their amendments at the CRWP, which are incorporated into the attached report. So this revised councillor officer protocol has come about as a result of, well, in part as a result of the recommendations of the independent monitoring officer, which really focused on improved councillor officer relations. The revised protocol seeks to set the framework for that relationship, and you'll see that some of the protocol replicates that which is in the old protocol, which is set out at Annex 2 of the report. But the new protocol really extends those provisions and has been drafted after a fairly extensive review of the protocols of numerous other councils, including district councils, and really considering examples of best practice, which have been, and these have been incorporated into the protocol. The structure of the new protocol is slightly different to the old one, but I hope that it's easy enough to follow. What the protocol tries to do is address some of those kind of thorny issues that councillors and officers sometimes come up against. So the protocol looks at the specific role of councillors and officers, the guiding principles for the working relationship between councillors and officers. I should note that the protocol refers to councillors rather than members, and it was felt that that's a term that the public recognise more than members. So throughout, it refers to councillors. It goes on to talk about the responsibility for decision-making under delegated powers. It talks about the specific role of statutory officers and their relationship with councillors and how councillors can't interfere with the exercise of the powers of statutory officers. It talks about specific issues when supporting councillors might come across when supporting a resident in legal proceedings, and really talking about things to bear in mind in that context. I've included a paragraph on councillor to councillor expectations in relation to conduct, and you'll see from that paragraph that I've set out that similar principles should apply in that regard, that are based on respect, essentially. There's a section on officers' report and officers' reports and who's responsible ultimately for the content of those reports. There's a section on officer advice to political groups, and that section really obviously goes into some detail but stresses the political neutrality of officers and kind of all that follows from that. There's a section on local ward issues, noting the significance of or the importance of sharing significant information that allows ward members to carry out their role effectively. There's a section on correspondence, and that obviously relates to the section in the more detailed section in the Constitution on correspondence. There's a section on dealing with the press and media, and that references the National Code of Recommended Practice for Local Authority Publicity and sets out the guiding principles which are provided within that code. And there's a section on councillors' access to information, setting out both the common law right to information, which is based on the need to know principle, and also the statutory right to information in relation to reports for meetings, etc. And then there's a section finally on what to do when there's a breach of the protocol. So as I said at CRWP, the devil is in the detail, and it is a detailed document, but obviously happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Does anybody? Councillor Duckworth.
Yes, I'm happy to support the majority of this item, and it's obviously very important. I have a slight issue with Annex 1 5.1, respect for differing political views and values. Well, there may be abhorrent political views and values, and we need to future-proof our constitution against what may happen in the future. There might not be any councillors at the moment whose political views I find abhorrent, but as I say, anybody who was living in 1930s Germany should have had the right and to have no respect at all for some of the political views and values then. So yeah, I'm not very happy with that particular bullet point.
I note that, and I totally appreciate what you're saying, and I'll have to think about how I might remedy that, and I'm not sure off the top of my head. Happy to take any suggestions.
Yes, Councillor Duckworth.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have a suggestion as the same as you. I think it just needs obviously we need to respect one another, and I do respect other councillors, but yeah, as I say, yeah, I'm happy. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind thinking about how it could be phrased, so that And the other thing is, you might not know whether somebody respects it or your political views or not, but.
I think the point is it's about these are guiding principles that councillors should respect and adhere to, but it's not you wouldn't necessarily know, but it's about how that's manifested in behaviour.
Councillor Scobie.
Will this be going to the next full council meeting? Because we also have the motion from the deputy leader around a similar subject.
Yes. Yeah, it should be going to the next full council if it is recommended from here this evening. Councillor Crittenden.
I'm sorry, which paragraph and annex was it? I missed
5.1.
5.1 in Annex 1.
In Annex 1.
In Annex 2. Yeah. Annex 2, because isn't Annex 2 being replaced by Annex 1?
Annex 2 is being placed by Annex 1, and Annex 1, 5. There is no 5. Sorry, Councillor Duckworth, can you refer me to the relevant paragraph again?
Well, on the page that I'm looking at, which is page 43, it says Annex 1 at the top and 5.1.
That's of Annex 1.
Yeah, sorry, 5.1 of Annex 1. Yeah. That's fine, thank you.
You with us, Councillor Crittenden? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Any other comments? And is there any other comments from anybody? Mr. Clark.
Thank you. It's just really to ask whether there would be a review period for this. If it's being brought in, will there be a 1 year, 2 year review of how it's operating?
There is no proposed review, but it will be reviewed in the same way that other provisions within the Constitution are reviewed. And certainly, if there's legislative changes that would bring about a review, or if there are other statutory guidance or non-statutory guidance or models of best practice that we feel that we need to incorporate in, then that would trigger a review as well. Thank you.
Councillor Munns.
Yeah, I'm just reading on the local ward issues, and when significant matters affecting the ward, making sure that local councillors get informed. I just feel sometimes that things happen in my ward that affect the residents, and we're just not informed. And I just understand that process and what recourse there could be if that circumstance should happen.
Well, at the end of the protocol, it refers to, it sets out what to do in the event of a breach. And so obviously you'd follow that guidance, and in your case, obviously bring it to my attention or to the relevant manager's attention. Let me just refer to exactly what it says in relation to a breach. But in terms of, part of the reason for addressing local ward issues and setting that out in this protocol is I know that the sharing of information has been an issue in the past, and it's something that this, CMT are really keen to address, and for that reason that's in there. And so it's hoped that this will be rolled out, perhaps with some training, and certainly Hannah Thorpe, who's sitting here today, there's a document that's going to sit behind this in terms of the working relationship. And so it's hoped with improved relationships with councillors and officers signing up to this protocol that issue will be much improved. But certainly there is redress, and the remedy for any breach of the protocol is set out at the end of the protocol. Sorry.
Thank you. I mean, it's just trivial things can happen, and all of a sudden, my inbox, as other councillors' inbox, can be suddenly filled up by something that's happened or changed, or But I'll welcome that, because I think that's desperately needed.
Councillor Crittenden.
Thank you. I'm just going back to Councillor Duckworth's point about item 5.1. I hear what Ingrid has just said about taking that away and looking at it, but I'm just wondering whether or not there is any viability to us actually being able to amend that here tonight, because I think that is a really important point that's been raised. So that's the first question, and if the answer to that question is it can't be done tonight, maybe we do or we do not come to a conclusion, whether or not how that would be amended in the future. So would there be a timescale to it, or do we need to hold this to defer it to another meeting in order for that amendment to be made before it's agreed?
This has obviously got to go to full council, but I'm very happy to agree a revised form of words for that particular paragraph that members of the committee here are satisfied with to take forward to the next stage of the process.
Councillor Duckworth, do you have any suggestions for changing it?
To be honest, I don't know if it needs to be in there at all, because we've got respect, dignity and courtesy, and I think, what as you say, they're guidelines, and I think if you've got respect, dignity and courtesy, you're going to listen to other people's points of views. I just think I would want to reserve the right not to respect a political point of view if it was abhorrent. So I can't think of another way of putting it that would allow somebody to say, I don't have respect for that particular point of view, actually.
Councillor Duckworth, I agree with you. That could just be removed, because respect, dignity and courtesy covers it. So I'll remove that part as it goes forward to full council. Thank you.
So could I have the amendment is just to remove the word respect?
No, that whole bullet point.
Or the whole bullet?
Remove that bullet.
The whole bullet point. Right, could I have a proposer? Proposed Councillor Duckworth, seconded Councillor Fellows. All agreed? Thank you very much. Are there any other comments to be made about the document? Okay, thank you. In that case, the recommendation is that it's recommended that councillors carefully consider the detail of the revised councillor officer protocol and make any recommendations they consider appropriate for full council to determine. Could I have a proposer, please? Seconded Councillor Crittenden. Are you all agreed? Members agreed? Thank you very much. Item agenda 6. Could I ask Mr. Hughes to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chairman. So this report asks the Standards Committee to consider changing the constitutional change process from a 3-stage process that being Constitutional Review Working Party, Standards and Council, to a two-stage process, so Constitutional Review to Council. The main reasons for doing this is that there can be a very significant lead-in time for reports and constitutional changes going from an initial idea through to actual agreement at full council. When we compare our process with other Kent councils, you can see from the table in paragraph 2.2 that the vast majority of councils have a two-stage process, so one committee that looks at constitutional changes and forwards them on to full council. Only Swale and partially Tunbridge Wells still retain a three-stage process, and Gravesham, in fact, only has a one-stage process. So not only would this streamline the process, it also frees up officer and member time by not having an additional meeting in the process. It's important to remember that Constitutional Review is a fully constituted committee of the council in the same way that this standards committee is. It shouldn't be seen as a subgroup of that. It's also a really good point that was made at the previous meeting, and we've included it here, which is that if you take a stage out of that process, every member is entitled to come along to whatever the remaining process is, i.e. constitutional review, and speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1, and a number of councillors did at the last meeting. And actually, it's a really good example of the last meeting where we took on board the points, and they have made changes coming forward to this meeting. So it's a really good example. So members are still able to input even if they're not a member of the actual Constitutional Change Committee. So at the last meeting at the Constitutional Review Working Party, they made a number of recommendations. So they recommended that we should move from 3 to 2 stages, that the Constitutional Review membership be expanded to make it more of a committee of equal size, or slightly smaller, but certainly bigger than what it is at the moment. They have an annual meeting to set out a work programme, and that we change it from working party to committee, because I think that has connotations of it being a lesser committee than it actually is. So we've made some comments on there that officers have absolutely no objection to any of the recommendations from the Constitutional Working Party. An annual meeting setting out the work programme is a very good idea, and that's certainly something that we will do in May after the annual council meeting. And strengthening the CRWP will make the committee a better committee with a higher profile and an increased standing. That can easily be done as part of the committee's panels and boards process that we go through at annual council. So that would be the point at which we would increase that membership. So members can agree with the recommendations from the Constitutional Working Party. They can make some other recommendations, or they can recommend that we keep it as it is. So I'll open it to questions if members have got any questions.
Councillor Fellows.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Where does the independent members come in with their input into constitutional change?
So the independent members are members both of this committee and of the Constitutional Review Working Party Committee as well. So they remain, they would still remain a part of the process. Absolutely, yeah.
I have the enviable task of chairing both. Councillor Crittenden.
Thank you. Item 3.1, which is the actual recommendations from CRWP, absolutely fine. Those were the recommendations, and no problem with them. But I thought that there was something missing from there, because during the debate, Councillor Scobie mentioned about having, I think it was Councillor Scobie, set dates for the meetings rather than just an annual meeting. So with standards, we have in our diary 4 meetings a year, and 3 times out of 4 they get cancelled. That's fine, because that means that all of a sudden I've got a night off. Whereas if you suddenly go, we want you at a meeting in 2 weeks' time, I thought that was also a recommendation that was mentioned during the debate.
It was definitely talked about, but it wasn't, as far as I recall, a recommendation. mainly because we would do a different timeline of meetings if you had, if we still retained standards as part of the process. That would then dictate when the constitutional review meetings would be. But if we didn't have that, then we would choose a different series of meetings. But it's certainly something, if members want to recommend that, we could do that. That's
So,
fine. We can change it at annual council.
Can I actually, I think that would be a good idea, because one of the things that was in the original report was about, from the officer's point of view, juggling arranging the meetings in the three-step process. So you would know when, whether it's a two-step or a three-step, you would know to time the 4 meetings of the year, or however many throughout the year. And then that would actually save your admin staff from ringing people round and can you come on this night and you know, all the juggling of that. And if you haven't got the work, then great, we all get a night off, and all you have to do is send out one email to everybody to cancel those meetings. So I think I would still want to recommend it. I know it was discussed, but I couldn't remember whether or not it was actually a recommendation. So I would definitely like to make that a recommendation before I raise my other points.
Unfortunately, Councillor Scobie is here this evening, and I'm sure he can. He's been refreshing his mind as what was said. Would you like to make comment, Councillor Scobie?
And just on that point, excuse me. My recommendation was that there would be a meeting early in the municipal year, say May or June, that would set out the schedule of work from officers for that year. I think CRWP differs from standards in that we wouldn't have regular business like potentially complaints coming forward. Constitutional changes are much planned, I would imagine, or based on legislative changes. So we would know at the start of the year if there's going to be any planned meetings or not. So I think there is a difference there. And I think if you look back over the years, there's actually very few meetings of CRWP. So you can certainly put placeholders in people's diaries, but I think it's better to do that on a year-by-year basis, because there may be some years there's lots of meetings, and there may be 2 years in a row where there's not a single meeting because there's no need to make any major changes.
Officers are quite happy to do either. Yeah, we wouldn't have a problem with either of those two approaches. I think it's for the panel to decide which way they want us to go.
Councillor Crittenden.
If I could just come back and just say, bearing in mind what Councillor Scobie has said, if you think that the workload is likely to be greater, then it would be a higher number of meetings that will be put in. I mean, standards, having been on it for 5 years now, how many have I attended? You know, I mean, like 9 times out of 10 it gets cancelled. So I would rather have the meeting in my diary and it cancelled than suddenly finding I've got something in there in 10 days' time. And that's the line that I was thinking, as generally, you're going to have an idea of what's likely to be coming up in the year, and it's exactly as Councillor Scobie has said. But how that is done from an administrative point of view and what the numbers are, then I think I would need to throw that back to you for the best way of doing it between what both of us are saying.
I mean, I think, as I say, if you want us to, we can set out a series of potential meetings as part of the annual work programming meeting, if that would be a good compromise. Is that...
And don't we approve this each year at full council anyway? The following year's sort of dates for meetings, or are there constitutionally mandated certain committees have to meet a certain amount of times per year?
We've actually agreed, the calendar that we agreed at the last meeting took us all the way through to 2027. So but there's no problem. I mean, we are taking a report to the next council meeting to tweak a date in the council calendar. So there's no issue. If members agree and full council agrees to get rid of standards from the process and now have a 2-stage process, there's no problem with us taking a report to the annual council meeting to amend the calendar to put specific dates in if that's what members want us to do. That's absolutely fine. We could do that way, or if you wanted just to leave it until the first meeting, depending upon the year's worth of work, and we could say, actually, well, looking at the work programme, there's enough for 2 meetings. We'll then just suggest 2 dates in that May paper if you wanted to.
Councillor Crittenden.
How about I move what I suggested, someone does or doesn't second it, and we vote on it, and then just kind of kicks it, rather than kick it around. So I move it.
So you would want that adding to 3.1, would you?
Yeah.
Correct wording?
Can I just maybe suggest we know when the full council meetings are going to be? So if we wanted to have meetings in line with each full council meeting a period before, so we wanted to suggest them. Again, I'm trying to think how many regular full council meetings we got. We got budget in February and the annual council meeting. How many is it, Nick? So maybe you would have them as holds in diaries, potentially a period before. So if for any full council meeting, any constitutional changes are needed, they're in the diary ready, and they can be a set sort of time ahead, so that any reports can be produced.
So the time ahead you're thinking of, possibly 2 weeks before a full council meeting? Or more than that?
No, it needs to be. Yeah, you'd want it to be at least.
For the wording, it would be schedule, I'm going to say 4 regular meetings in line with the appropriate council meeting. Because if this stays as a 3-stage process or a 2-stage process, it might be different to whatever you say. That's, if you use the word appropriate, then that gives the flexibility, and also the flexibility with what Councillor Scobie is saying about some months we have more meetings and less meetings. So then it's down to the scheduling of the diary. So if that's okay, it would be schedule 4 meetings per year in line with the council's programme of meetings.
Obviously, I've had a proposer. Can I have a seconder? Seconder, Councillor Scobie. All agreed? Thank you very much. So, Councillor Crittenden?
It's me again. I'm coming back to some of what I said last time at CRWP. I'm sorry. I do appreciate the changes that CRWP made, and I do recognise that certainly if we go down to a 2-stage process from a 3-stage process, it will help to save the arranging of meetings. However, if we have the meetings arranged 4 times a year, then that problem does go away. I think my challenge with this still is that I'm being asked to make an assumption-based decision rather than an evidence-based decision. We know from the evidence, the information that has been provided, that most other councils have a 2-step process for making constitutional changes. But what we don't know is how many of those councils experience challenges at full council, or how the size of their CRWP or Constitutional Review Committee affects the likelihood of those recommendations passing or being challenged at full council. And I am very mindful of, as I said at CRWP, the fairly recent challenge that came up with the backbenchers and the questions at full council, despite it having gone through a 2-stage process. Now, my challenge with that is, if you do get challenges at full council to recommendations from CRWP, then as members, under standing orders, we only have 1 3-minute shot at speaking on anything that is coming up at full council. So either we have to suspend standing orders in order to have an actual debate about changes, if there a real exchange of views, just as we do in a committee, or we trust the 3-stage process. But what I really want is, I want more information about the likely impact of changing from a 2-stage to a 3-stage process. And that's information that I haven't got. So I feel like I'm making an assumption-based decision rather than an evidence-based decision. And that goes against my professional training, I'm afraid. So that's why I'm sticking my guns on this. Thank you.
Does anybody, Ingrid, do you want to comment?
Well, I previously worked in an authority that had a 2-stage process and worked very effectively. I think it would be really difficult to find an evidence base in that regard, because it's also subjective, and how one set of councillors respond to an issue is very, it's different in every authority, in every district. So it's really difficult to provide evidence in that regard. But the most important thing is having a very, very, very rigorous scrutiny of the proposals. And obviously, that are put before the committee, whether that be a two-stage process or a one-stage process. But obviously, in the event it's a one-stage process, extra rigour would need to and would expect to be applied. That's what I would respond to that, really. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the 3-minute thing, I think, is, yeah, I think that the point being whether it's a 2-stage or a 3-stage process, which is that the full council is not an appropriate forum to have a full discussion about it, and that's why I say whether it's 2 or 3-stage process, it doesn't really matter in that sense. It's about how people engage in the meetings when we have them, whether it's a 2 or 3. And I think, as I say, we've said if we can get 20.1 speakers to come along. Yeah, we didn't have time, unfortunately, with the publication date being the day after the previous CRWB meeting to do any formal research. But I mean, anecdotally, I have spoken to my colleagues in other councils, and it is very difficult for them to be able to say, oh yes, that particular council meeting had a great big hoo-ha about X decision. So it's pretty difficult to get hold of that sort of it is subjective, isn't it? Subjective sort of level of detail.
Councillor Bayford.
Thank you. I believe that 3 minutes is quite long enough to make salient points if they are made succinctly and they've been well planned. And I really believe that anything that reduces the time it takes for processes to be embedded and to relieve administrative burden is a positive thing. So I would personally totally support the 2-stage system.
Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Crittenden and I have been debating this for about a month now. I think this is the 4th or 5th time, and I think we both approaching this from different points. I think both are valid. I would ask, similar to sort of Councillor Bayford on this, if your starting point should not necessarily be what's written there, it's what is the right decision. And I'm starting from what makes sense based on what I've seen and what I think would work, not on what was written several years ago, which, you know, I believe there are holes in. And for me, if you look at the membership of standards and if you look at the membership of CRWP, there's completely different people. So we had a really good discussion at CRWP, have put forward recommendations, and for example, if particular members weren't here tonight, those recommendations would be just seen in isolation, maybe not understood, and the standards committee tonight could have just said, no, we'll ignore those and go and move on. So it's actually very, very hard if you're an individual member trying to make a positive change, because you've then got to attend multiple meetings with different people and say the same thing over and over again. So my question, if we're going to stick with the current system, why a 3-step? I mean, what additional are we adding by having the same discussion twice with different groups? Surely it makes sense to have one discussion with all of the people there, and if we're not happy from that discussion, you kick it back and ask for more information. You know, at the end of the day, full council is the body that will make decisions. Anything we discuss, any recommendations we want to put forward, will go to full council and they can decide to kick them out anyway. So I think the role here is to make sure that any ideas and changes are tested, are honed, are built into something that we feel would work before it goes to full council. And I think, in my opinion, that's better done as a 2-step process rather than a 3-step process, because I think you then get half of one committee's view fudged in with half of another committee's view, and then when it does get to full council, I think it's in a worse shape.
Councillor Crittenden.
I think that the thing that I want is it to be robust, which is what Ingrid you were just saying. But the bit that I'm saying here is I'm not looking at just what's happened in a couple of council meetings. It's like, what is the situation over, say, the whole period of like a 4-year council? How many of those other councils actually find that they get challenged at full council with a 2-step process? I've never known it happen here. We go through a 3-step process, and so in the time I've been here, the last time it happened was the only time I can recall it happening, unless I've forgotten one. And is that because we have the extra robustness of the three-step process compared to a two-step process? That's the evidence that I'm looking for. I do think that increasing the size of CRWP will definitely reduce the likelihood of it, but I was still looking for that evidence. And I do have to nicely disagree with Councillor Bayford. I think 3 minutes is quite a good amount of time to make a point. But when you're in a situation like this, where you're actually having an exchange of ideas, not being able to come back when someone else says something just doesn't work in full council. And you only have that one shot at your 3 minutes. So in order to actually debate things, as we have tonight, things have gone backwards and forwards. You don't get that at full council, so it's gone. And that's my challenge is when it gets to full council, that is not the place to have these discussions because we don't have the facility understanding orders to do it. So that's why I still have a difficulty with this one. Thank you.
Councillor Bayford, did you wish to say something?
No, only to reinforce what I've already said, that I feel that 3 minutes is plenty of time to make a salient point. I think that the any discussion before that should have taken place with the sorry, I always get this wrong, CRWP. And I think whatever you come to council knowing what you want to say, the point you want to make, and I think 3 minutes is ample.
Thank you. I think Mr Hughes wants to say something, then Councillor Fellows.
No, I think I'd just say I think, as the points have been made, I think it's about the quality of the debate that you have at whatever forum it is that you're in, whether that's 2 or 3 stage process. I mean, I think if we take the example of the CSOs that we've just looked at, we didn't make any recommendations. There wasn't really much of a debate, and that's gone through. So as a 3-stage process, I'm not sure what value, no disrespect to the committee, but what value having a 3-stage process has had in that process as opposed to a 2-stage process. I think, as I say, it's about what you talk about and having interested, engaged, and again, this is no criticism of this committee at all, but whatever members you have on whether it's a stands committee or a constitutional review committee, it's about having engaged councillors and having engaged councillors speaking under 20.1 to come in and put their views across and having a robust debate about it. I think it's that quality of debate you have is far more important as to whether or not you have a single or a 2 or 3-stage process, personally.
Councillor Fellows.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I agree. Anything we can do to streamline these processes, I think, is a positive. But the only thing I'm concerned about, and currently at the moment, is about political balance. I mean, committees are, at the moment, are very heavily politicised one way or the other. Unfortunately, I'm coming from one that's disadvantaged there. I know at full council we're heavily outnumbered by the other side. You know, very easy for one party to force things through. You know, I think the more debate on things. I mean, I know you say you can come at 20.1, but you're not a voting person at 20.1. You know, so that's just my point of view.
Councillor Scobie, did you wish to?
Yeah, I've got 3 points here, but just on that point, because I think it's a valid sort of question from Councillor Fellows there. I'm sort of reaching into the back of my mind here. Am I right in thinking that external audit have a role in looking at the council's governance structure and providing input? I know we obviously, the work that's referred to in the report as to why we're talking about moving this was based on a very serious incident, the Grant Thornton produced a report and a number of governance related things. But if, for example, we decide, like, say we just follow your logic there, Councillor Fellows, and the Labour group decided this was our chance to completely rewrite the constitution because we got the majority to slant the rules in our favour, I'm under the understanding that governance and audit would have that the external auditors would have any role in sort of challenging that, because I think councils are limited by what we can actually do under the law, aren't we?
Yes, yeah, if you decided to come up with some obscure and quite clearly biased rules, then yes, I think that would be as part of their annual report that they do. They would point out the fact that they were not happy with the way that our constitution worked.
I think, as it was discussed the other day in CWRP, hopefully with the extending the size of that committee, a lot of this will be eliminated and we should have the right balance on political parties as well, whereas the other night, as we know, there was only one party present.
Yeah, can I just make a...
So, 2 more points.
I think, as I say, the Constitutional Review panel and this panel are politically proportional, and that is as set out in law. By making the Constitutional Review panel bigger, that actually increases the representation from the smaller groups. So, as a representative of the wider council, the bigger the Constitutional Review, whatever committee it is, the more viewpoints you can have in, as well as voting, as real voting members, plus the additional independent members, plus people who want to come along and put their point of view in as 20.1s.
So, sorry, Chair, 2 more points if that was all right.
Yeah, go.
I think I think Councillor Crittenden has raised an important point, but I do think there is, we just need to sort of look at what's in the Constitution. So a member has a right to give a 3-minute speech on an agenda item at full council. If there is something that they want to ask a question about, or somebody misrepresents their position, they have an opportunity under a point of personal explanation to be able to come back. If there is something in the rules that you're unhappy about, you can make a point of order, and if any amendments are proposed and there's a debate, you get a second chance to have another 3-minute discussion. Now, I would argue that if a member stands up and gives a really, really good 3-minute speech and challenges it, and none of their colleagues agrees with them and speaks up, that while that person should be heard, that person cannot necessarily keep coming back and directing that meeting. I think we've all been in meetings where you've had somebody who feels passionately about something, and it's good that is aired and listened to, but that can't dominate the whole movement of the council. So I think we just got to balance the rights of backbenchers to have their points heard and to challenge and question with the reality that there are 55 other people, and that at some point we will need to move on. This is coming from me that, you know, at governance and audit, I think me and Councillor Munns are the only ones that really want to push cybersecurity and have long discussions. If we can't convince our colleagues to come with us, sort of the end of the discussion, really. And the second point, again, that I think it is important to note, Chair, and I did make this at CRWP, the Council unanimously agreed a submission to the Boundary Commission in December to reduce the size of the Council by 1/4, and part of the justification of that was actually to merge standards into governance and audit. So I'm not sure it is necessarily wise when we're looking at making a change to the Council to consider standards within that 3-step process anyway, because we are already saying that in the next 2 to 3 years we're already talking about the role of standards changing. Now, I know that isn't necessarily binding and there would have to be a number of changes within that, but I think it is important context that the role of standards may well be changing in the future anyway.
But I think everybody has had their say. Anybody else wish to speak? No? Right. Well, the recommendation is, and I think it includes 3.1, 1 to 5, which the 5th one being that we schedule 4 annual meetings for the CWRP. And please correct me if I'm getting it wrong. Members are asked to make a recommendation to full council, amending the council's constitutional change process from a 3-stage process to a 2-stage process. Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Scobie. Seconder? Councillor Bayford. Are we all agreed? No, I think we need to take a vote. Could I have a vote for those in favour, please? Those against? 2. The motion is carried and the proposal will be put forward to the full council. Thank you. Item agenda 7 is my report for the year. Unfortunately, I've not got a copy of it, but I've got a fair idea of what it says, and I'm sure you've all read it. And have you got any comments to make? I'm trying to think, I don't know if I've seen it.
It's definitely there. It's definitely there.
All right.
It's definitely part of it. Yeah, the supplementary agenda's there.
The vast majority of the report obviously is all about facts and figures. As usual, I always do an introductory paragraph. For those who haven't seen it, it is very short. And basically, it's being my third annual report as chair of the Standards Committee, it's pleasing to report that there was a reduction in the number of complaints made to the committee within the last year. With the advent of a general election, can I please remind members on their use of social media? 1.3, there was an ever-growing number of media platforms in the public domain, and with this in mind, the social media policy and its use is currently under review. And at the end of the report, I thanked the two Monica officers, the members of Democratic Services, and all the independent persons for their support and help over the year. And that concludes the report, apart from obviously all the facts and figures of how many complaints were made, etc. Thanks. Has anybody got any comment to make? I think there's only one thing I want to say, and that is, it's the reiteration of the use of social media. And that is a very big concern. Can I have a... Sorry, Councillor Crittenden.
Councillor Fellows, just... Yeah.
Sorry, can I take your word? Sorry.
You started to ask something. I'll let you... Can you ask your question first?
Councillor
I
Fellows.
was just asking what your specific concerns were, Chair.
I think it's safe to say that having seen observations of comments made on the social media sites, I won't commit myself to saying which ones, but the matter definitely needs addressing. I think it's safe to say, I think Ingrid would probably agree with that.
It's a widespread issue nationally for councillors and not just councillors, other professions and others in politics. It's a widespread issue, the use of social media, as I'm sure everybody's had experience of. It's how and when to use it, you know, in what state of mind you should use it in. So it's an issue, and obviously we do have some guidance, as the Chair's report refers to. We're looking at revising that guidance, and it's just important to be mindful of, you know, councillors' code of conduct when using social media, and obviously when you're not faced with somebody, when you're in dialogue, it's very easy to come out with things that you might, you know, otherwise not. It's commonplace for people to have a glass of wine when they're using social media. That can create all sorts of issues. It's just a common, you know, it's a common issue, and it's an issue for councillors, and it, you know, across the board, it's something that standards committees are having to deal with. So, you know, I support the Chair's comments in that regard.
Councillor Crittenden.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to hear your answer to Councillor Fellows first, because I was going to... My next question is, what sort of changes or what sort of things are you thinking of trying to put in, and what is your timescale of when you're likely to come back with a report on it?
I can't answer that because I don't write the policies. I think Ingrid and communications are working together to get it finalised, am I right?
Yeah, Hannah might have some further information in that regard, but certainly very aware of the need to progress. It's something I haven't had a chance to get my teeth into as yet since I've taken up post, but I'm really mindful of it, and also just really mindful of the need for further training for all members on that issue. It's a tricky matter at times, but it's on my agenda. Can I just say that for now? Hannah might have some further information.
Thank you. Yeah, just to reiterate, so the team have produced refreshed social media guidelines specifically for councillors. We gave advice and guidance within the induction session, which is something that we do as a standard part of the Democratic Services induction when new councillors come onto the council. You obviously don't, it's not statutory, so you don't necessarily get everybody in the room when we're imparting that guidance. We do share the slides after that session as well. So we are tightening up the guidance that we've got in terms of our councillor policy, and that will be, it's been produced already, it just needs to go through the approvals process, so it'll be in the next couple of months, I would imagine.
Thank you, Anna. Does that answer your question, Councillor Crittenden?
Can I ask another one? And that would be to do with the enforceability of tightened up guidance, because social media is social media. And I've had people a while ago saying, I'm writing something on my page that is about me, and they're coming back and saying, you're a councillor, aren't you? So, people know your name, and it might not be that you're writing as a councillor, but it's still very difficult to identify those differences. And that's just comment I wanted to make more than anything.
I think once the policy is going through the relevant stages, it would come to CWRP, and I'm sure we are all, or standards, yeah, and we are fully aware of certain parts of the policy that we would want in there, and one of them is exactly what you're saying, that it making people aware that that you're writing it as one, a member of the public, or two, as a councillor. And we find that we think that is extremely important. Councillor Bayford.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think this is the biggest issue that, people sort of try to get out of things by saying that, well, this is personal to me. But surely training on use of social media should be mandatory. Can it not be made so?
We can't make training mandatory. Well, the planning and licensing training are agreed as mandatory because your group leaders have made it so, but we as officers can't enforce you to come along to a training session that we offer. That is by your group leadership ensuring that you as members come along. I know it's subtle, but officers can't tell members what they can and can't do. We can advise you. So we would strongly urge you to attend our social media training, but I can't force you to turn up, if that makes sense.
Well, what I was going to say is that anybody who makes comments on any social media platform has obviously got to be very mindful of the code of conduct.
Yeah, just on that point around making training mandatory. To be on governance and audit, training is mandatory because I believe the internal auditor advises that any member sitting on governance and audit needs to have a certain level of training. So I think there is a little bit more nuance to that. And I don't know whether a similar recommendation would be made from the internal auditor should we have untrained members subbing on to planning and licensing.
But as you say, it's guidance. It's not the rules. There is no rule that says you cannot be a member. It's like, for example, the sit for guidance that says that cabinet members shouldn't sit on governance and audit is a great rule, but at the end of the day, it's still guidance. There's nothing that in law that says a cabinet member couldn't sit on a governance and audit committee. Not best practice, but it's not illegal. And I think this is the point. There's lots of things that we should do because they're the right thing to do, but they're not written down in law that says you can't do this or you can't do that. I think that's the point I'm trying to make.
Thanks. Councillor Scobie wants to come back, Councillor Fellows, and I'll come to you.
It's a small point, and I think that needs to be communicated better because there's been twice in the last year where members have tried to sit on committees and have been told explicitly by officers they can't, rather than you probably shouldn't because it's against best practice and this is only guidance, except all the stuff that you just said there is literally been, you cannot.
It's a play on words, I think. Councillor Fellows.
Yeah, thanks. I just feel that we can just bring in as many guidelines and training and code of conducts as you like. I mean, if we've got loose cannons that have a phone in their pocket, I don't think this committee or this council has enough teeth to stop anybody picking that phone up out their pocket and saying exactly what they want, when they want, sharing what they want. And until we do have until we do have the teeth to suspend or withdraw someone from the council, then you're never going to stop it. We come across these loose cannons every now and then. There we are.
I think you're all aware that the powers of the Standards Committee was taken away by Mr Pickles some years ago, but we understand that the local government agency is looking at reinstating certain powers for Standards Committee, and I think we're just waiting for the nod from them, aren't we, Ingrid?
Don't have any update currently, however.
Anybody else wish to make any comment? Councillor Quittenden.
Yeah, was it not agreed, my memory may be getting a bit astray at my great age, but wasn't it agreed within this chamber some years ago in this committee that all council members, no matter what level they were at, were rather like police officers, that they were councillors from the minute they opened their eyes in the morning till they closed them at night, and as such should follow the code of conduct anyway. So I don't know how that affects your social media problem.
I think as social media's got bigger and bigger, and I think Ingrid would like to make a comment on that.
Well, just to say that councillors have got a right to a private life under the Human Rights Act and can act privately and in their personal capacity. And so they're not bound by codes when they're acting in their personal capacity.
Does that mean when they're acting in personal capacity on the wonderful Facebook or internet or whatever it is, that they've actually got to make a statement that they are doing it as a private individual rather than a council?
No, not necessarily. But obviously if they're holding themselves out to be a councillor, even if it's a personal account, or referring themselves to a councillor, I mean, it's nuanced, but if they're holding themselves out to be a councillor or referring to themselves as a councillor on a personal account, they could still be deemed to be acting in their role as a councillor, and therefore bound by the code and therefore potentially in breach of the code. However, if there is no reference to them being a councillor and they're simply doing whatever they want to do in their private and personal life, then there's no redress under the code.
I think it's safe to say I, for one, will be looking at the wording of the policies exactly in relation to what you're saying, that if a councillor is going to speak on any social media platform as a councillor, it should be made quite clear that that account is the councillor. If he wishes to speak as a private member of the public, then he has a different platform. And that's something I think that will be looked at very closely when the policy does come out. Councillor Scobie?
Yeah, I think social media guidance and training is really, really important. I think the reality is 99% of councillors will comply with it, and if are found to be in breach of that, will engage with the standards process. If there's a redress, will respond and hopefully apologise and deal with that, and occasionally there'll be disputes. What it can't guard against is what we've seen several times in the last sort of 10 to 15 years, is people that will just disregard the rules, see standards asking them to have an apology as a chance to get more publicity and show that they are being attacked and harassed by the council. And unfortunately, until the standards regime changes, that 1% of councillor is going to be allowed to keep doing that. And that's the difference here. So I think every debate we have needs to be on whether the social media guidance, the training, the rules that we can put in for the majority are sound and logical. And hopefully the government in the future will bring in legislation or changes that would bring back some sort of teeth to standards to stop people from misusing their platform to get access to confidential information or to say whatever they like.
That's what we are hoping for. Anybody else got to make any comment? In that case, in relation to the Chair's report, sorry, Councillor Bayford.
Thanks. I was just going to say that, having heard what Councillor Scobie's got to say, I think this is vitally important because it brings the behaviour that we've discussed brings the whole council into disrepute. So I think it's very important that this is corrected.
No other comments? In that case, could I have a proposer and a seconder for the Chair's report, please? Councillor Duckworth, Councillor Crittenden. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions regarding the current standard complaint statistics? I unfortunately haven't got a copy with me, but I have read them. No? Any other business? No? In that case, it's 8:04 and I declare the meeting closed. And thank you all for coming.